I wonder how many of you out there have actually had the opportunity of taking a moment and at dawn to watch the sun as it rises. How many here have ever actually? Wonderful. Yes. I too have done this many times. It's a wonderful feeling to get up so early in the morning when it's so very dark, and then to go out and to watch and to look and to see if you can see something of light on the eastern horizon. Of course, in southern Ontario, it's not that easy because there's always a glimmer of light on the eastern horizon. But you wait and you watch, and slowly there's a silver mist that gathers on the horizon. And slowly that mist begins to glow. And as it glows brighter and brighter, that silver gives way to hues of purple and lavender and indigo. And as it grows brighter and brighter, it becomes more of an amber and orange. And then finally, there's that moment when the crest of the sun tips over the earth, and this brilliant ray of light just floods everything. And suddenly the earth is bathed in this golden, beautiful light. All these moments of transition are somewhat sacred in different traditions. The First Nations people considered watching the sunrise a deeply spiritual exercise. And from my own experience, I can certainly concur with that. There is something oddly mysterious about these moments of transition, whether it is from night to day or day into night, or when the seasons change. There's something almost magical about those moments. Long, long ago, my grandma's cottage was up on the shores of Lake Huron, and it faced towards the east. It was impossible in the mornings to sleep in, barring, of course, rainy weather, because her whole front was basically a bank of large sliding window doors. And so when the sun rose in the morning, it just flooded the whole cottage with its light and its warmth. There was no sleeping in. Now, the converse was also true about the evening time. Once the sun went down, when I was a kid, or even a teenager, there wasn't a whole lot to do in Grandma's cottage. So retiring early wasn't as difficult as it usually is, which was a good thing, because I got into a new routine of getting up very early to greet the sun. You can't beat him, you might as well join him. I am very grateful to my grandmother and for her endearing and her fascination with nature. It certainly had its effect on me. And I was privileged to spend at least a month each summer, sometimes two, with her at her cottage. But in those days, I lived mostly in a city called Guelph, Ontario. I remember as a kid when we moved there, I kept saying, "Say that name again, Guelph." It was an oddest sounding name I'd ever heard. Much to my surprise, I found out that it was actually the name of the royal family at one point in time. And so Guelph, in fact, calls itself the Royal City. It changed because it had some minor thing to do with a war with Germany and didn't like having a Germanic name, so they switched it to Windsor. So I grew up in the Royal City of Guelph. It was a place of many firsts. My first high school dance, my first date, my first kiss, and my first, well, you get the idea. It was also the place of my first religious stirrings. It was here that I became baptized as a fundamentalist Christian into the Christadelphian faith. It was here that I gave my first sermon and I spoke there a lot. Well, that's now 30 years ago. Why such a long absence? Well, life has a way of throwing things at you that you had absolutely no way of anticipating. One of those moments I recorded in my journal. It's a very brief entry. December the 11th, 1988. This morning, I watched the sunrise over the old city of Jerusalem. I knew before I penned those words. I knew the moment as I watched the sun rise over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I knew that my life would never be the same. I knew that that moment was a pivotal one in my life. What I didn't know was just how dramatic and how profound and deep those changes would be. Now, it didn't happen in that moment. It didn't happen all at once. There were many moments in that year that I spent in Israel and beyond. One moment in particular, though, stands out, and that was a wrong turn one day when I was sightseeing. I ended up walking into the East Jerusalem suburb of Silwan, and I happened upon a demonstration between a group of Palestinian children and the Israeli Defense Forces. The altercation ended in a hail of gunfire. In a hail of gunfire that lasted less than a minute, I was completely stripped of all of my previous Christian Zionist illusions. There was that moment, and there were many others, not necessarily as dramatic or as tragic as that one, but they all combined to set me on something else, and that was my real pilgrimage, a 30-year pilgrimage that took me through many religious traditions and through many deeply spiritual practices and many wonderful spiritual communities, until I found my home here, at first Toronto. Thank you. And now I prepare for a new chapter. As of Tuesday, September the 4th, 2018, I will be the new intern minister for the Unitarian Congregation of Guelph, Ontario. I will be supervised by the Reverend Jessica Purple Rodella from Grand River, which is nearby, and I will be spending at least once a week with her there. But for the most part, I will be returning after a 30-year absence to the pulpit in Guelph. And I couldn't imagine a more fitting end to this long and somewhat tumultuous chapter in my life, nor could I have created a better way to begin a new chapter in my life. Heraclitus was a Greek philosopher. He penned a famous expression you might have heard before. He said that no one can step into the same river twice. What he meant by that is that by the time you turned around and decided to step back in the river has changed. And so, by the way, have you. When I returned to Guelph, and I have visited it recently, well, I can tell you right now, the Guelph of today is not the Guelph that I lived in 30 years ago. That probably goes without saying. And it certainly goes without saying that I am not the same person that I was in those days. I will not be returning to the pulpit to proclaim the one truth and the only way to God. I will not be there to proclaim Jesus coming back to the earth. I will not be there to proclaim the coming of the end and the apocalypse is nigh. Well, unless, of course, you include global warming. Then you might have a case. It will be with the humble realization that it took me almost 30 years to come to conclusions that many of you sitting here probably take for granted. I did not have the benefit of an open-minded, intellectually seeking, compassion-focused upbringing. The phenomenon of a closed mind is something I understand very well. And just a word to the wise, everybody thinks they have an open mind. But because they are such hard-won truths, they have become near and dear to me, to the point that I am committing my life to their service and to the service of the community that espouses them. Because I really understand that value of the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. For many 2 decades, I have worked with the developmentally handicapped as a result of that. I've also begun, I've spent the last year in prison ministry for the same reason, because of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I truly believe in the freedom of conscience and in the search for truth and meaning. In fact, I've spent most of my adult life in that pursuit, and it hasn't stopped. I believe in consensus building and democratic principles. As a trade unionist and as president of my local, I would often say to the members, it doesn't matter to me so much what we decide to do. What matters to me is that we decide and that we do it all together. And I believe, as someone who is concerned about violence in the world, I believe in struggling for a global community. And I believe in the interdependent web of all existence. And I love the expression, we need not think alike in order to love alike. So I guess this has been a long-winded way of saying, see, I won't be seeing you for a while. But I wanted to take that opportunity to do that. And also for some of you who have lovingly noted that in some ways for the past few years I have at times been more absent than present, I want you to understand, and this is an apology, and I say in my prison ministry often to the inmates, there are no excuses, but there are always reasons. And the short answer to my absences was that seminary is a lot more rigorous than I expected, and it was 60 kilometers away, and I was working full-time here in Toronto. Not that it's academically more challenging than any other discipline, but it requires a much deeper work in terms of what I can only describe as inner work. And if you're new to this congregation, please don't think that you have to be here every Sunday. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you become involved in a community, community is about relationships. It's about the individual relationships that you have with its members, but it's also about the relationship you have with the community as a whole. And all relationships take time and energy. It is one of the things that I have come to value and learn from this community. And I've learned lots. I still remember my very first Unitarian sermon because it was right here, probably right where I'm standing, and it was given by the recently arrived Reverend Sean Newton. And he was, I have to confess that, his sermon didn't make any sense at all. But the reason I remember it so well is that he said something I did not expect. As a trade unionist, I had worked shoulder to shoulder with many secular humanists. That wasn't a problem for me. I had a deep respect and reverence for humanism. What I did not expect was for a minister to say on a Sunday morning that he was an atheist and a humanist. The folks that I hung out with wouldn't be caught dead in a church on Sunday morning, let alone become a minister. But he gave me a puzzle. And I didn't know it then, but I was hooked. It was a puzzle that I had to solve. And frankly, I'm really glad that that happened, because I have learned so much from humanism that I almost can't put it into words, but I'm going to try. It has both enriched and broadened, well, I guess those are the same, and deepened my faith. And it works like this. While I may personally believe that life has purpose and it has meaning, I realize now that it doesn't need them. It really doesn't. Life is wonderful and life is beautiful in and of itself. It doesn't need any excuse. It doesn't need to justify itself. This gift that we all share, this gift of consciousness, of awareness of the universe around us, to be able to look up at the stars at night, to look at the sunset or the sunrise, or to experience the wind on our faces, or the touch of a close friend, or a family member, or a lover. All of those things are wonderful and beautiful in and of themselves, and they need no justification. But what I've learned most is that that silver golden thread that goes through all religious traditions. And I love what we say on Sunday morning here. We say these words: love is our doctrine. And I can tell you that after 30 years of searching, that's all the doctrine that we need. Love trumps belief every single time. And I would much rather live in a world without God, in a universe without gods of any kind, than live in a world without love. Love is our doctrine. And I just love that saying. And I want to thank you all for that. As for me, on this first week of mine that I'm entering, as I become the new intern minister at Guelph, I'm going to take a walk up the hill. There's stairs leading up this big hill in the center of town, and at the top of the hill is a basilica, and it overlooks the city. Yes, I'm going to go there very early in the morning, and I'm going to watch the sunrise over a very different royal city. Thank you, and blessed be.